Chapter 27. The tower of books might have toppled from my grasp when the massive rock troll's shadow passed over me, but Shabana set her pile calmly on the ground, then surprised me when she took a giant sidestep to put herself between the threat and me. "Stay your ground," she warned, ears flattened against her hair. "We don't want to fight." I didn't know where she garnered the courage, and I might have been even more surprised if my heart hadn't been pounding my ribs with heavy little punches. My mind scoffed at the idea of reaching for my staff when I took in his powerful shoulders and the boulders for biceps bulging on his arms. But then he raised his big split chin into the air and sniffed. "The fruit." After grabbing the wraps, I stepped around Shabana. When I extended them, she gripped my shoulder. "What are you doing?" I dipped my chin toward the fruit rolls. "Fulfilling their purpose, saying thank you." I raised the rolls. The troll sniffed again and reached out with thick fingers to gently grasp a single roll. He held it to his nose, grinned, then nibbled at the edge. Shabana's shoulders relaxed, but I was nowhere near that point of comfort. Mine practically covered my ears as I offered the fruit. The troll rubbed its belly with its free hand.
Good.
His voice rumbled in his throat like distant thunder. Shabana's head whipped around. "Did he just say—"
Not it.
The troll thumped a fist to his significant chest.
Brunk.
I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd trapped in my lungs. "Is that your name?" I didn't wait for an answer. I pressed a hand to my chest. "Tess." Then I pointed at my Michonne companion. "Shabana." The troll stuffed the rest of the roll in his mouth, then nodded. He thrust out a finger, and although we both jerked, he continued the motion.
Tess.
Shabana. I enunciated every syllable.
Shabona.
A smile crept across my face, and reverberating shivers of relief caused my shoulders to jostle. "Here." I raised the rest of the fruit. "For saving me from the wolf." The rock troll's eyebrows shut up. Then he pointed a thick index finger at his own chest.
Me?
I nodded, then lifted the cloth wrapping higher. The giant's tentative reach lifted the rolls from my grasp. He twisted a tattered belt that matched his short pants so closely I hadn't even noticed it, and a little pack slid into view. After he untied it, he tucked the wrapped remainders inside. In one smooth motion, 2 thick fingers touched his forehead, then his chin, then he dipped them toward me with his palm up. I interpreted it as a gesture of thanks. I shook my head, then repeated his gesture. "No, thank you for saving me from the wolf. I would be dead if it wasn't for you." The troll's head bowed deeply. When it came up again, it tilted to one side as his gaze wandered to the piles of books we'd dropped to the dusty cave floor.
Books.
I nodded, then raised one and held it out. "Yes, magic books." Instead of accepting the tome, he raised one hand.
Magic.
The lines in the palm of the thick hand facing me glowed yellow. Then the light faded as quickly as it had come. Whoa. Ill-prepared for speech, Shabana's words came more like the croak of the tree frogs found near our farm. In my excitement, I took a half step forward before I realized what I was doing. "You know magic?" The troll shook his head, then held his forefinger and thumb an inch apart.
Little.
He raised 2 fists, then held their inner sides to his chest so his elbows jutted away from his torso.
Craft magic.
He raised one finger in the way I would have done if I was telling someone to wait. I jerked when he stepped forward, but he twisted his considerable body sideways to slip past us. He strode beyond the stone chair and the place where I'd hidden the tomes, then moved a huge rock that jutted from the wall near the floor. I'd seen the stone before but thought it was part of the wall. A big leather pack appeared when he set the stone aside. He lugged the faded brown bag over, dropped himself onto the stone chair, then rifled through it. I noted 4 pockets on the front and a metal snap, bringing me to wonder as to where he'd procured it. He lifted a tiny black rope from inside with something dangling from one end. Then he offered it up at eye level. He tapped his chin with 2 fingers again, then pointed them at me. The slim rope dangled in his grasp. I drew my hands toward my chest. When I didn't take it, he tapped his chin with both fingers again.
You.
Then he tapped the smaller pouch on his belt.
Fruit.
Although I understood, I shook my head. "No, the fruit was a gift in return for my life. I'm already in your debt." His thick black eyebrows knitted together as his eyelids formed slits through which his shining orange eyes stared at me.
No.
He shook his hand twice, and whatever was attached to the rope trembled in his grasp.
You. Safe.
I blinked both eyes as I examined the rope. Simple idol of physical defense. Level 5. Type, jewelry. Slot, neck. Quality, common. Durability, 30 of 30. Effect, +2 to melee defense. All physical attack damage reduced by 2. I gripped the rope in a gentle grasp, and the troll let it slip from his fingers. The idol on one end depicted a figure with her hands drawn to her chest, much like the troll's motions of moments ago. "This is beautiful, Brunk. Where did you get it?" Brunk ripped a knife from a sheath on his belt. Then Shabana jumped backward and stepped in front of me for the second time.
No.
Brunk rose, then held up the palm that didn't clutch the knife.
Look.
He rifled through his bag and presented a stick. Although he kept his distance, he reached out as far as he could to offer the stick to Shabana. She took it, turned it sideways, and scanned it. "Oh, I see." She turned and held it up. A carving in its center depicted a wide-faced figure with a jutting split chin. A rock troll, but with slimmer features, maybe a female. I ran my fingers over its nose. "So you made the idol?" My gaze shifted to the wide blade of his knife. "With that clumsy thing?" He nodded.
Brunk cut.
His hand flat, he stroked it across the opposite shoulder. Then I thought I understood. I mimicked the gesture. "Carve?" He thumped his chest.
Brunk.
Then he sliced his hand across his shoulder again.
Carve.
Then he nodded enthusiastically. I grinned from ear to ear. He speaks with signs as well as words. Shabana shook her head in derision. "It took you this long to figure that out." Because she'd stepped in front of me twice when she'd sensed danger, I couldn't muster a sarcastic expression in response to her quip. I offered the idol to Brunk. "It's beautiful, but I'm already in your debt." Brunk turned his head up to one side, his gaze wandering to the cave wall, then shook his head. Shabana sighed. "You're being rude, and you're offending a rock troll in the process. Besides, look at him. I don't think he needs it." She had a point, and the last thing I wanted to do was irritate Brunk when things were going so well. I pulled the rope over my head, and the idol bounced against my breastbone. "Thank you." Brunk's head came round, then he gave a curt nod.
Welcome.
He raised a palm to his ear. Again, I repeated the gesture and the word. He nodded his approval. Shabana smiled. "This is awesome." I nodded. I too am in awe. My gaze leveled on the rock troll. I winked both eyes in succession. Brunk. Level 14 rock troll. Giant humanoids known for their strength, rock trolls are often used for slave labor in Middle Rubal. No class selected. Melee power rating 28. Melee defense rating 32. Ranged power rating 6. Ranged defense rating 4. Magic power rating 1. Magic resistance rating 5. I tucked the idol into my robe, then patted the cloth over it. "Thank you again, Brunk." I tapped my forehead, then my chin with 2 fingers, then stretched them toward the troll. He raised his palm to his ear.
Welcome, Tess.
"Now, we have to carry these books back to the academy. Will you be here for a while? Could we come back to visit?" Although his language left something to be desired, Brunk grasped mine without difficulty. His eyelids vanished and his eyebrows raised.
Yes, visit.
He waved one hand toward himself in a beckoning motion, but I took it as the sign for visit instead of an actual invitation to come closer. He stepped aside, clearing the way for us to leave. But when I stooped to scoop up the books, he knelt and joined in. He stacked them evenly in Shabana's and my arms. When we returned to the field, I peered over my shoulder to find him standing at the mouth of the cave watching us go. Shabana sidled closer. "The master has this saying he likes, and I will repeat it here, for it is the best representation of my sentiments." I nodded, although her words confused me a bit. "Holy crap." "I haven't heard that one," I said. An interesting utterance. "The right utterance. Our foundation used to come under attack by all manner of possessed minions during a conflict between the master and the demon underlord. I'm saying more than I should. Suffice it to say, I never laid eyes on a creature such as Brunk, even then, nor during our migrations in the north." I considered the secrets I kept from her. I didn't dare ask about the shroud her people cast over the master of their foundation, so I remained focused on Brunk. Me either. Such an intimidating form, but he seemed really sweet. Gentle is a better description, I think. I shook my head. If you'd seen him break that wolf's back when he saved me, you wouldn't choose that word. Without looking back, Shabana lowered her voice so I could barely hear it above the rustling high grass blowing around our robes in an easy breeze. He's following us. Her words gave me a jolt, and I almost glanced over my shoulder, but the Michonne stopped me. Don't look. He's keeping his distance. I think he's watching for danger because of your encounter with the wolf. Oh, how could you hear him? Your ears become sharp when you rely on them for survival. I imagine that's true. I tried to picture her former life when she migrated with her tribe from camp to camp with no place to call home, contrasted with my sheltered life on a farm I never left. A new respect for Shabana and her people warmed my blood. When we opened the hidden door in the outer wall, I ventured a glance over one shoulder to spy Brunk's hulking figure trudging away in the direction of the cave. Shabana followed my gaze. Yep, watching out for us while our hands were full. I pulled my lower lip into my mouth and gave my head a single shake. He seems to be alone in that cave. Now he's made a couple friends, and he wouldn't see them come to harm so soon after we've made acquaintance, would he? Shabana hoisted her books higher. No, I guess he wouldn't. She looked down at the tomes. These things are going to be a pain to drag up that ladder. To the contrary, we'll have help. Help? Yes, Roshan will certainly come to our aid. She might even get Master Welling. They long for the return of these items. Why do you think they're so determined? I got the impression if these fell into the wrong hands, they could be quite dangerous. Judging from what little I've been able to read, I understand why. In your hands, you hold pure shadow power. No wonder I can't stop shivering. The inhibitions I'd had for my first couple days at the academy peeled off all at once when I remembered how Shabana's first and second instinct had been to stand between the huge rock troll and me when it moved in my direction. Hiding my true nature from someone who proved her loyalty by shielding me and risking physical harm seemed uncouth. Funny, the tomes send warmth through my body. How the goddess uses our affinities to detect risk to the light or power for the shadow is interesting. With some struggle, I flicked the latch on the inner door, then stepped into the tunnel next to the metal bars. Shabana stopped, holding the stone doorway open with her hindquarters. What do you mean? One eyebrow flicked so high, I thought it might reach her hairline. Do you have shadow affinity? Now a chill swept over me as I realized my secret might disappoint her. But I'd opened the door. I nodded. I didn't want to be on my own among strangers. You were the only person I knew. Relief washed over me and the chill dissipated when Shabana smiled and shook her head in dismissal. I've lived among the Shadow Blessed. Your secret need not be a secret at all, but I will keep it if that's what you want. The eyebrow cocked again. How high? I told her. The books tumbled from her grasp. Chapter 28. The next morning, my eyelids drooped when I pulled the quilt off and sunlight poured onto my face through the giant windows in my room. A knock at the door brought me around. I slipped it open, peeked through the crack, then groaned. It's like you detect the moment I come into consciousness, Shabana. I twisted a knuckle in my eye as the door swung open, then went for my robe. No. She closed the door behind her. Class is in 20 minutes and I didn't want you to be late. I sense a new repetition in my life. Although I was grateful, the gratitude didn't exactly flow. Those kinds of sentiments required at least 5 minutes of wakefulness. You look exhausted, the Michonne clucked her tongue. Luli keep you late last night? I shook my head. I was up studying some notes I'd made from one of the grimoires. You took notes? One of my cheeks tightened, and although I was sure the expression presented as childish, I didn't care. Of course I took notes. I'm trying to learn things, and something tells me the academy is going to drag us along slower than I'd anticipated. This is why you stowed all those materials in the cave. You wanted the head start. Head start. I like this phrase. Shabana flashed me a sideways smile. I don't know why I ever got involved with you. You're going to be trouble. I shrugged my frayed robe to get the seams aligned with my shoulders, then gave it a quick tug. And how would I make trouble for you? Just call it an intuition. I could as easily call it paranoia. Shabana snatched my staff from the wall behind the door, then slid it into the sheath on my back. She gave my shoulder a quick squeeze, and I found I enjoyed the simple display of camaraderie. What rotation are we on again? Today is intro, then stamina, she replied. My eyes widened. Ooh, I like intro. That, she said as she pulled the door wider and gestured me through, is because you are a nerd. What on Solara's plane is a nerd? I sometimes forget the vernacular that traverses the Foundation isn't known to the outside. Her shoulders dropped, then she exhaled through pursed lips. It really is a world unto itself. You said this Foundation was, what was the word? Segmented from the rest of the world? Shabana's eyebrows stitched together as her forehead assumed deep wrinkles. Huh? Realization waved over her features. Ah, instance. Why that word? Shabana fell in beside me, equaling my gait as we pressed up the hallway. It's not going to be easy to understand. It took me a while. Then you should be able to explain it, if you're allowed. Her head twisted around and she shot me a one-eyed glare of suspicion. You give the sense our secrecy bothers you. I pinched my lips and cocked one of my eyebrows in reply. Okay, I could see why. Look, we trusted you with the secret, or you wouldn't have been allowed to leave, so it can't hurt anything. Just don't expect the details. Fair enough? I nodded. When adventurers fight demons and beasts in dungeons, they often enter these instances. So that beautiful place is some kind of dungeon? This doesn't make sense. Are you going to let me explain? Sorry. I waved a conciliatory hand. Please. Our sandals clopped down the spiral staircase at the end of the hall closest to the library entrance. Shabana's fingers grazed the rail in contrast to my death grip. Something about the twisting stairs made me dizzy. There is one such place in the Plague Barrens. The Cine and some others from the Foundation adventured there before forming our home. You should hear the stories, but I can't tell them. Maybe someday. She raised one shoulder in a half shrug, lending the impression my lack of information wasn't so vital to her well-being. Solara closes off these spaces to keep darkness at bay. Within the confines of a dungeon instance, the demons and beasts vie for supremacy, which stifles their advancement. So, an ethereal prison of a kind. You're quick as a whip, except that's not quite right. The instances are their domains, and there are many different versions of them, with mirror images of the same beasts. Although I knew each word on its own, the way she combined them made no sense. Huh? If you understand the concept of ethereal planes, then you should grasp this. Her tone was near chiding. I could enter one instance and fight the creatures there. You could gather a separate party, but if you entered, you would be in a mirror world, not where I am. You must be in the same party. So if I walked into an instance now, you could come in because we are in a party. Shabana nodded as we crossed the threshold into the library. Exactly. The goddess separates the instances so parties can focus on their conquests. But why? Wouldn't greater numbers allow them to more easily conquer the dungeon? Shabana shook her head. Then she stopped and nodded. Yes and no. Large parties are called raids. Instances with more dangerous creatures than a simple party of 4 or 5 can handle allow for more party members. But once the number goes past 5, a raid is created. Then the raid leader can sort the groups into smaller segments to work together. In her interface. Shabana smiled at my usage, but didn't mention it. Right. Does anyone know why the goddess would create copies of such places? Only theories, really. You remember Giles, the elf? Yes, the one who brought me a candle the morning we came to the academy. Right. The way he explains it, the Plague Barrens instance was created millennia ago to contain some of the demons who carried the blight over the ancient elven city of Nin and sent its residents fleeing to the north. A great number, though not all, were imprisoned, and many dangerous beasts still roam the lands. We passed the library's central desk, and an attendant with close-cropped hair on the sides peered over a pair of spectacles at us. Shabana waved with a few loose fingers and waited until we were out of earshot to continue. Now at that time, adventuring was a much more common lifestyle. When a special breed of adventurers appeared, there were more of them than there were opportunities to advance. My mouth dropped open with the realization. So the goddess created these mirrors of the places to build an army to fight demon kind. Something like that. Not exactly, but close enough. Where did these people come from? This I cannot tell you. What? Why not? Shabana stopped in the hallway and met my gaze. If we are to be comrades, there are things you have to accept. One is that I cannot tell you everything you want to know. I have people to protect, people I love, people who have given our pride a home. Never will I betray them with loose lips, and I require your acknowledgement. You will not pry into my head to find out. You will know what you need to know when the time comes or never. I don't control these things. Do you understand? Taken aback, I peered both directions, then nodded. Of course. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be annoying. I'm just setting expectations, Tess. Can you tell me what you call these people who flooded the countryside in search of adventure? I don't suppose that could hurt. They were called Shenhua, or Mythics, but that's all I will say. I made a quick note in my interface to search the library for Shenhua, then nodded. Thank you, Shabana. I'm glad you're here to tell me these things. To my utter surprise, she wrapped an arm around my shoulder, pulled me in, then kissed my temple. You're welcome. Now let's go nerd out. Nerd out? She sighed as we stepped across the classroom's threshold. Let it go. Shabana took the lead, but she stopped about halfway up the stairs, and I almost bumped into her. I followed her gaze to find two figures sitting in the seats adjacent to the ones we used before. Johin Tur wore a stony expression, his piercing eyes locked so hard on Shabana one might think she'd punched him in the nose. When Elrin Zen saw me peek around Shabana, his lips creased into a smile that revealed no teeth. The Michonne turned. Come, we'll sit somewhere else. I clenched my back teeth, but let my expression flatten. Hokram's hell we will. I stomped past her and up the stairs. Looks like our seats are open. Are you sure? I answered by trudging one thumping step at a time to our seats.
You got my key?
Johin asked. I played coy. Key? What key? When he didn't respond, I continued. Oh, that key. Nope, still rusting in the elements north of town. It hadn't even occurred to me you'd be here. So thrilled I was by a day of your absence, you slipped my mind.
You shouldn't annoy your betters.
He tried to goad me with his presumption of superiority, but the way he crossed his arms and rubbed them for warmth contradicted his bravado. Elrin repeated the gesture.
Chilly in here.
Shabana shot me a knowing gaze, then smiled. Unaccustomed, are they to? I shook my head in nearly imperceptible quakes. They didn't need to know about my shadow affinity or anything more about me than they already did. As far as I was concerned, Elrin and Johin hadn't earned the privilege. Johin dropped his hands into his lap, then leaned toward me to whisper.
Just so you know, I will have the key at whatever cost Master Welling deems necessary. You crossed the wrong man.
Master Welling? My mentor-to-be was the owner of the key? What did that mean? Had I somehow misjudged him? I shook my head and cleared the thought. Master Welling would have given Johin the key to the basement no sooner than he would have given it to a child. But if Johin wanted to play games, then I will take the key to Master Welling. Johin jerked, his head whipped around, then he leaned in again, wearing a toothy expression indicating his intent to growl. But then Master Miswell During lurched into the room. A cane tapped the floor before each pair of sliding steps. I wondered how old he was. Johin retreated, his lips pinched into a thin white line.
You know not who you trifle with.
I didn't know if he referenced himself or Master Welling, but somehow I felt safer with the latter. After all, the shadow magician knew my potential and embraced it, but Johin Tur didn't know that, and my mind suddenly wandered into the thought about how I could use that to my advantage. But I do know it isn't Master Welling. Master During greeted us.
Good morning.
The class muttered replies in a chorus.
Please open your interfaces, but not your texts. Today's lessons will be practical in nature.
I brought up my mind window and stared at the tabs across the top, wondering where he'd take us.
First, let's view the information on your Home tab. Next to the real-time picture of yourselves I know you all adore are your primary stats and a short readout of any occupational skills you've learned.
I viewed the page. Contessa of Milbury, level 5, human, no class selected. Attributes: strength, 14, dexterity, 3, intelligence, 7 + 1, wisdom, 2, constitution, 20, charisma, 6. Combat skills: melee attack, 4, melee defense, 6 + 2. Weapon skills: Staff, 10. Occupational skills. Augmentation, 1. Carpentry, 6. Runecrafting, 11. General skills. Survival, 4. Locate traps, 3. Magic schools. Light magic, 2. Shadow magic, 0. Nature magic, 0. Status effects, affinities, languages, all neutral and lawful learned languages. Common, Elven. Magic affinities, potential, 100%. Light, 25%. Shadow, 91%. I noted the increase to melee defense from the charm worn around my neck, as well as the increase in my light affinity, which I assumed resulted from my use of inner illumination. When taken in the context of all these other statistics, the whole seemed overwhelming. Maybe the scrolls could only do so much if I wanted to achieve a truly rounded advancement. Then again, maybe rounded wasn't the way to go. If I focused on the powers that best suited my affinities, I'd likely excel. Master During interlocked his fingers at his waist.
Today, we'll discuss the primary attributes and what we've learned about each over the ages.
Collective groans filled the room. Master During smiled.
Please raise your hand if you are unbound from those who raised you within the last month.
Hands shot up, and I was surprised to find every student raise them save for a blonde young woman near the front. Master During nodded as if he'd anticipated this.
The goddess saw fit to limit your advancement in this world until you came of an age to be responsible for it. In return for her wisdom, you groaners adopt the position that you know all you need to about your attributes.
He raised one finger.
But you overlook the most important aspect of life at the Academy, an aspect you must understand in order to achieve high marks and advancement.
He paused, perhaps for dramatic effect.
You know nothing.
A few jerked at his harsh utterance, and his voice reverberated around the sprawling space.
You were selected to be the first class at Warrington Academy because you were still bound when we found you. Any skills you learned were wiped clean when you became unbound, but luckily, your proficiency in them will earn you additional skill points when you relearn the occupations or associated combat methodologies.
Why would the goddess take what we've learned as children from us? A girl asked. What sense does this make? Master During raised his shoulders and lifted his hands so his palms faced the slanted ceiling.
Why don't you ask her, then see what answer comes?
He stared at her for a long moment, but his expression was soft, relaxed.
We should all be thankful only our skill points and not our attributes reset. Now that we've got that bit of realization into your heads, shall we learn something, or would you rather debate Solara's wisdom?
When no one answered, he gave a single curt nod.
While you'll see not every attribute has clear-cut statistics, we've designed our curriculum to focus on what we do know and pass that knowledge on to you.
He paced the length of the wide counter as he spoke, then turned to pace the other way when he reached the end.
For our purposes, you can set eyes on your interface and reduce the readout to only your primary attributes. Do this now.
I did. Attributes: Strength, 14. Dexterity, 3. Intelligence, 6. Wisdom, 4 + 2. Constitution, 20. Charisma, 6. I wondered why my father bothered with my education if it only resulted in an intelligence of 6. That seemed low, but I had nothing to compare it with. Instead of taking a moment to think about it, I blurted a question. When we analyze our compatriots, why do we only see power rankings and the like instead of attributes and skills? Master During raised one hand, but continued pacing.
A fine question we will come to when we discuss wisdom.
Wisdom? Why not intellect? I decided not to voice those questions out loud. Despite a wisdom score of 2, his next words proved I hadn't miscalculated by keeping them to myself.
Again, class, the first portion of instruction is a lecture. Save your questions for the 20 minutes at the end, and you will find many have been answered. We will spend most of our time discussing the attributes most affecting magicians, although I'm sure the Templars Academy up north takes a different approach. But we won't ignore the less critical attributes either. It's imperative you leave this class at the end of a semester understanding how each attribute can affect you in combat situations. So, let's start at the top, shall we?
He stopped and levitated onto the center of the counter.
Everyone in this room was born with 1 point in every attribute. When you received your second strength point, you were able to deadlift 5 pounds. While the calculations surrounding many functions of the various attributes are inexact, this is one of which we are certain. For each added point of strength, one can lift about 12 additional pounds, but at rank 20, each point allots only 5 additional pounds. Now let's put those minds to work. You're welcome to use your interfaces to figure this, but who can tell me the maximum deadlift weight of someone with a strength attribute of 20?
My mind raced to form the calculation. No poundage at birth, 5 pounds at rank 2, then add 17 ranks times 12 pounds per to reach the total at rank 19. That's 209. The diminishing return at rank 20 was 5 pounds per attribute point. 214 pounds, I said. Master During raised his crooked finger again.
Correct.
Elrin covered his mouth with one hand and muttered.
Bootlicker.
It seemed I'd been demoted from bootshiner. I pinched my lips together, but didn't respond and ensured my focus remained locked on our teacher.
But just because you can deadlift a heavy pack doesn't mean you should. For each pound over half your maximum lifting potential, you receive an encumbrance penalty of 1% per minute. When that penalty totals 50%, you will lose 10 stamina per minute. This is a single reason one of 3 classes you attend is dedicated to this vital secondary attribute.
At first, it struck me as odd that he'd called something so important secondary. But when I remembered stamina was most influenced by one's constitution, at a rate of 8 stamina per constitution point earned or spent, it made sense.
Strength also reduces the damage inflicted by melee attacks when mitigated by using a shield. Who can tell me why it's important that students in the Light School of Magic would want to understand the effects of strength and constitution?
The blonde elven woman up front responded. It's critical as a healer to understand the limitations of those you heal. Since our tanks will more often than not rely primarily on strength and constitution, a better comprehension of these attributes will serve us in serving them.
My, I have a sharp contingent before me today. Very good.
He gave his curt nod.
While I'd argue constitution and stamina are more important for your understanding of your frontline fighter's abilities and hindrances, you will inevitably find yourself trying to decide whether to heal another party member based on whether or not your fighter can hold an enemy at bay for a few seconds.
He scanned the room, waiting for nods of understanding, then continued.
Next is dexterity. Please note the following so we can push through. Each point increases ranged attack power and ranged accuracy with non-magical weapons, as well as the chance to dodge. At skill level 2, dodge chance is 1%, but for each additional point, dodge is increased by 0.5%. Even then, the skill is diminished when fighting higher-level enemies. We will not go into the math there during this term, as it's largely dependent on the level gap between combatants and many other factors. This isn't actually a mathematics class, and your speed with arithmetic won't benefit you in the intense throes of combat.
He winked an eye.
You should also know that classes in the assassin progression line receive damage bonuses per point of dexterity in the way frontline fighters benefit per point of strength. Hopefully you'll spend less time healing them.
Master During went on to cover the other attributes, but it took longer than expected. No one dared interrupt to ask questions. Until Elrin Zen did. To his credit, he raised a hand. When I contrasted him with the blunter personality his friend displayed, I knew Johan would have just blurted it out.
In regard to intelligence, how does it affect the ability to weave?
Master During's expression slackened. His shoulders rose, held for a moment, then dropped. Then his facial muscles tightened into a forced smile.
Intelligence can help any crafter to hone their skills, but somehow I don't believe you're asking about sewing garments.
I allowed my head the slightest swivel, just enough to see the knowing expression on Elrin's face. I sensed his pleasure that the instructor didn't want to discuss the topic, but I didn't understand why that was so.
Manor weaving is not a topic of our curriculum, and for good reason. It's an ancient practice given little credibility, and what's more, only shadowcasters of the highest affinities could venture attempts at commanding such power.
But why hide it from us if it's something we might face someday?
Johan asked in support of his friend's query.
The implication I shroud anything from you is unappreciated, young Johan. Despite your paternity, you should endeavor to mind your tone.
A little touchy about it, aren't you?
Master During cast his levitation spell and settled softly onto his sandals. He strode to the right-hand column of stairs, then peered up at us. In that moment, I wish I'd listened to Shabana and taken other seats so we weren't considered pariahs by our proximity to the young men on either side of us.
Mr. Ter, what is your shadow magic affinity?
What? Why do you...
Master During barked.
Answer.
Johan lowered his voice.
4.
During raised a hand to one ear, even though he'd already illustrated his strong sense of hearing in our first class.
Speak up, so all can hear.
4.
I fear there will be no mana weaving for you, Mr. Ter.
Rumbles of laughter filled the class. Johan's face swelled as blood filled his cheeks. He bit his next words.
But that has no bearing on how we might someday face such a magician on the opposite side of the fighting line.
You forgot my words. Ancient practice, little credibility. Besides, you missed the more crucial point.
During crossed his arms over his chest.
Yeah?
Johan pressed.
And what's that?
If you ever come into contact with one so powerful they can tap into the lava lines deep in the earth to cast in real time, there's only one viable contrasting tactic.
Yeah?
Johan echoed himself.
And what is that, Master During?
I couldn't believe the nerve on the half-boy sitting there with a proud smirk on his face, and the sudden urge to knock it off with one end of my staff because of how he disrespected our master brought me to dig my fingernails into my palms. But Master During's next words drained the tension away.
Should you ever have the misfortune to come across a being of such outrageous shadow magic affinity, of whom I know none, your choice is simple.
He paused and gave a slow scan of the other students until a few leaned forward in their chairs, anticipating the sage advice to come. Master During's bushy eyebrows furrowed and deep wrinkles creased his forehead.
Run like Holcrum himself aims to set your ass on fire, boy.
Hey guys, it's your boy Arlo. I hope you're enjoying Fireborn so far, but I just wanted to drop you a quick reminder asking you to click that subscribe button because of how much it helps me out. And although the books are free to you, they weren't free to me. So I appreciate you clicking that subscribe button and hit the bell icon while you're down there so you'll be notified when more chapters come. Thanks. Arlo out.